David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If you watched the Trump impeachment inquiry hearings with us the last couple of weeks, you probably noticed this Republican Congressman, Devin Nunes, who was doing a hell of a lot of talking, certainly more than I wanted to hear from him. The reason he was doing that is he's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. So he got to issue opening and closing statements right alongside the chairman of the committee, Adam Schiff. And every time Devin Nunes would go on and on about how the ratings were down for the hearings, how the hearings were a waste of time, how there's simply nothing to see here. It's all pointless, and Trump didn't do any bribery, corruption, extortion, quid pro quo. And he certainly wasn't looking to force Ukraine to smear Biden or looking for dirt on Biden. And it now turns out, this has been a stunning weekend of news, that Devin Nunes himself was allegedly involved in trying to find smears of Joe Biden himself. The calls are coming from inside the House, so to speak. Devin Nunes is part of the impeachment hearings as a questioner of witnesses. He is now implicated in what the impeachment hearings are meant to investigate. It's yet another person who, because of their personal conflicts, and in this case, alleged corruption, should have nothing to do with the proceedings whatsoever. This is like Attorney General Jeff Sessions recusing himself from anything Russia related. This is like Attorney General William Barr, who right now should be recusing himself from anything Ukraine related that may come before the Justice Department because of his involvement and being implicated in it. Devin Nunes can't be investigating this. He's part of what we are trying to investigate. He should be a witness answering questions, not a member of the committee asking them. So I'll set this up for you. Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's lawyer. I struggle with what to even call him now. He is a lawyer who works with or for Donald Trump, or did at least at one point. Rudy has these two associates who were recently arrested, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. The lawyer representing one of them, Lev Parnas, said that Parnas is ready to testify under oath that Devin Nunes himself met with a former Ukrainian prosecutor, Shokin, in 2018 to talk about investigating Joe Biden and his son, Hunter Biden. Devin Nunes reportedly went to Vienna, Austria, to meet with Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin, who is himself at the center of a lot of what is going on here. Shokin ended up being fired after a whole bunch of leaders said this guy isn't doing his job. And of course, Trump says Shokin was fired in order to protect Hunter Biden. Now, this might not be true, the allegation being made by Lev Parnas here. Maybe Lev Parnas is making it up. But number one, it would be extremely risky for Lev Parnas to be making this up without being able to have some evidence suggesting that it's true. And we will get to the topic of evidence next, because it turns out, oh lordy, there are tapes, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. The allegations about Nunes do line up with known facts about Nunes having meetings in Europe around this time, which, by the way, you, the taxpayer, paid for, and I'll get to that a little bit later. If this is true, the hearings themselves have been infiltrated by people who should be targets of the investigation. Devin Nunes shouldn't be asking questions. He should be answering them. The ranking member should be recognized as a witness, not as someone who gets to participate in the hearings. Should any of us be surprised about this? Nunes is the guy who, while he was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee back before Democrats took control of the House, he was supposed to be investigating Trump, and he was actually running to the White House to let Trump know what they were doing. So it shouldn't be surprising. This is one of the dirtiest Republicans in this entire Trump era, and it's actually even worse. Not only did Devin Nunes apparently do this, he did it on taxpayer money. He did it with your money. A new ethics complaint claims that Devin Nunes spent $57,000 in taxpayer money to go to Europe, himself and with staff, to try to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and to convince European officials to get involved in the smears of Joe Biden. Your money was spent on this. They need to get this guy off of the committee and instead, under oath himself, to answer questions. He should recuse himself immediately from any future hearings. even if only 5% of what's being alleged is true. And at this point, even talking about resignation is reasonable here. This is one of the dirtiest guys. This is their hero from the hearings, along with Jim Jordan. And he is actually involved. He's complicit in what is being investigated. But this is not the only news from this weekend related to Rudy Giuliani's associate, Lev Parnas, or what we learned from him. There is more, and it is tapes. Let's talk about that next. So Lev Parnas is the indicted henchman of Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. He has already said, I will testify under oath that Devin Nunes was flying to Europe and trying to push Ukrainian officials to find or to claim to have dirt on Biden. Lev Parnas has now reportedly delivered recordings of Trump and Giuliani to the House Intelligence Committee that's running the impeachment hearings. Depending on what is on those recordings, this may be the blockbuster so far of this entire story. These are audio and video recordings, as well as photographs, and these include Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. We don't yet know what is on the recordings, but what is increasingly clear is that Lev Parnas is not the type of guy to mess with, especially after he has also implicated Devin Nunes personally in being part of the round-the-world trips seeking dirt on Joe Biden on taxpayer dollars, by the way, as we already discussed. Really, it seems that people like Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman are the types of people it's best not to associate with at all, because they might be helping Rudy Giuliani do his stuff for Donald Trump at first, but these are not dumb people. And they were collecting recordings, and at least as far as Lev Parnas goes, Igor Fruman has actually not cooperated at all. Lev Parnas seems ready to spill the beans and has already turned over audio-visual recordings involving Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. I think it was James Comey that said, oh, Lordy, there are tapes. This is potentially huge. And this feels, again, like history repeating itself, going back to Nixon in the 1970s, where a whole bunch of stuff happened, a whole bunch of allegations and assertions were made. And then at some point into the scandal, it was learned there are recordings. And the recordings, of course, are very, very damaging in many of these cases. Now, I got an email yesterday over the weekend saying, David, don't you think that Russians have the Oval Office bugged at this point? Trump had that Russian spy recruiter, Sergei Kislyak, in the Oval Office. We have to believe Donald Trump is under surveillance by the Russians now, don't we? I don't know the answer. Nothing would surprise me at this point. But as far as these tapes go, if Trump is on the tapes, we can only assume it's not good for him. Because consider how self-incriminating Donald Trump is in public, right? Donald Trump doesn't even have the sense or the ability to avoid self-incrimination in public. Later, I'll get to his latest Fox News interview, which is a doozy, and he does a lot of self-incrimination. If you understand how useless and clueless Trump is when it comes to not self-incriminating, when he knows that he's in public, imagine what this guy says in private. And people who are behind the scenes who were behind the scenes on his reality show, The Apprentice, have talked about this. And I'm not even talking about the likely use of racial slurs, which Trump is accused of behind the scenes at The Apprentice. More likely, the tapes could be of Trump in conversations which clearly indicate he knows people he has since claimed not to know. There could be tapes of Trump using language that makes it obvious that he specifically wanted a quid pro quo, bribery, extortion, whatever. The tapes could be anything, and I can't imagine that they are exculpatory in nature. So we will see what comes of these tapes. The House of Representatives Intelligence Committee reportedly just working through the tapes right now. My prediction is, number one, this is not going to be a particularly good week for Devin Nunes. And if anything, the Thanksgiving holiday will help them to take attention away from this absolutely disastrous news. And it's also important to remember, just as a general thing, when we are looking at this issue of tapes and recordings and everything else, Trump thinks that the things he says in private are exculpatory. So, for example, last week when Gordon Sondland testified on a phone call, Donald Trump said, I don't want a quid pro quo. And then Donald Trump heard that and said, hey, that sounds great. That makes me sound innocent. And he came out and with the helicopter blades whirring, he said, here's what I told Sondland on the phone. I don't want a quid pro quo. And then any common sense thinker would say, wait a second. there's no quid pro quo. Why are you calling your ambassador and saying, I definitely don't want a quid pro quo? This is like the example I gave last week. I call my girlfriend and tell her, hey, pick up a few things at the grocery store and listen, don't shoplift. I don't want you shoplifting. I don't want you stealing the stuff. Unless there was reason to think that that would happen, you wouldn't even bring that up. And of course, we know that now the timing of Donald Trump saying this to Gordon Sondland was because he already knew that allegations of quid pro quo were growing. It doesn't help his case whatsoever. He doesn't even realize it. And after the break, we're actually going to get to video, which once again, this is just a gong show, bizarre interview on Fox News, where I believe Trump thinks he is making himself look innocent, and he has actually completely self-incriminated. That's coming up later. Make sure that you are signed up on the David Pakman Show newsletter. Black Friday, this Friday, we will have an email blast going out with an amazing membership discount. If you've been sort of thinking about becoming a David Pakman Show member and supporting independent media, this Friday will be a good day to do it. We'll have an email going out in the early afternoon with a coupon code. To be notified of that coupon code, simply get on our newsletter at davidpakman.com. Let me know what you think about the tapes on Twitter at @dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a big thanks today to two new David Pakman Show members recently signing up at joinpakman.com, Gerald Sylvia and Ray Liu. Gerald and Ray, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it so much. I also want to say thanks to Austin Luvero, who has been a member for almost 5 years. Can you imagine? How insane is that? Not so insane anybody should cancel, but it's insane. Thanks, Austin, for being a member for so long. Join these great people at joinpakman.com. It takes only 60 seconds at the most, really. It's very quick to sign up. Instant access to the bonus show, the commercial-free audio feed, the commercial-free video feed. And you will be a supporter of independent media, part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Not that any of you fine folks would ever be part of the problem. Okay, so let's get right back into it because it's been a very busy news weekend. Devin Nunes, Republican congressman from California, as I told you earlier, has now been implicated in the Ukraine fiasco. Republican Congressman Devin Nunes, the same guy who was running to the White House to talk to Trump while he was running the House Intelligence Committee investigation of Donald Trump, the same guy who was asking the questions during the last 2 weeks of Trump impeachment inquiry hearings, is now accused of meeting with Ukrainian officials and being one of those people looking for dirt on Joe Biden. And we have travel records that corroborate at least the timing of these allegations. And Devin Nunes appeared on Fox Business Channel yesterday, and he was interviewed by Maria Bartiromo. Now, understand, Maria Bartiromo used to be sort of inoffensive financial journalist on CNBC when I was growing up. I was a teenager. I was starting to get into understanding stocks and markets and so on and so forth. And she has become one of the biggest sycophantic Trump brown-nosing journalists in the ecosystem over the last few years of the Trump era. She interviewed Devin Nunes and asked him straight up, Devin, is this true? Did you go to Vienna like Rudy Giuliani's henchman, Lev Parnas, alleges, and meet with Viktor Shokin? And Devin Nunes not only doesn't answer, he doesn't answer in the most absurd way possible, which to us is completely transparent as a lie. But unfortunately, because he invokes the idea of fake news CNN, this probably will be pleasurable to many Trumpists who have been conditioned by the meme of fake news. He says, I can't talk about that because the allegations that I did this are criminal, implicating CNN. Take a look at this video.
Were you in Vienna with Shokin?
Yeah, so look, Maria, I really want to answer all of these questions, and I promise you I absolutely will come back on the show and answer these questions. But because there is criminal activity here, we're working with the appropriate law enforcement agencies. We're going to file all this. Everyone's going to know the truth. Everybody's going to know all the facts. But I think you can understand that I can't compete by trying to debate this out with the public media right, when 90% of the media are totally corrupt. And because this is criminal in nature, and because it's so bad, it's so slanderous, we've got all the facts on our side, and we're going to file in federal court because I'm not going to sit here and try to compete against the media that I have no chance of winning with. I will win in court, and they'll have a chance to cooperate, and they'll have to show how they worked with somebody who's been indicted, which is, likely conspiring to obstruct justice.
So I want to just be clear before I move on. I got to get your take on the impeachment hearings, but just to be clear, you're saying you're suing CNN, you're going to sue Daily Beast. I know you've sued Twitter in the past. Do you think this is going somewhere? You're telling me that CNN committed criminal activity.
Well, it's very likely.
All you need to know is that you didn't hear a no. You didn't hear Devin Nunes say, no, I wasn't in Vienna meeting with Viktor Shokin. That was nowhere in there. That's what you call, yes, he was there. He will say it was for some other reason eventually when it can no longer be denied that he was there. He's pretending that he simply can't compete with the media narrative that is against him as he claims to be. The reality is it's obviously true. It already has been corroborated, at least circumstantially, by the financial records of his travel to Europe at the time in question. Simply say you weren't there if you weren't there. The idea that CNN is criminal here is, of course, it's a red herring. It's a complete misdirection, but it's sadly a misdirection that will probably be effective on a lot of Trumpists who have been swayed by the supposed CNN is fake news narrative. Devin Nunes got caught, and now all he can do is pretend he can't talk about it because he's suing this person and he's suing that organization. And this could all end up really going backwards for Devin Nunes, because as I've already told you, there are congressional travel records that corroborate this. He appears to have done this on your dollars, on taxpayer dollars. There are recordings of Trump and Giuliani where, for all we know, this was discussed, which Lev Parnas has provided to the House Intelligence Committee. Where we are headed is that Adam Smith, not Adam Schiff. Schiff runs the House Intelligence Committee. Smith runs the House Armed Services Committee. It's a different congressman. Adam Smith says that Nunes probably has another ethics probe coming against him. He was already the subject of an ethics probe in 2017. Were you in Vienna with Viktor Shokin? I want to answer these questions, and someday I will come back and do it after endless frivolous lawsuits work their way through the system, and you've long forgotten about my involvement in this. That is effectively what he is saying. And by the way, Maria Bartiromo, the interviewer, again, a total Trump brown-noser, she pretends that this answer makes sense. It seems like she's actually going to ask a question to try to just get a straight factual statement, declaration from Devin Nunes. Bottom line, were you in Vienna with Viktor Shokin? And then Devin Nunes launches into this, I'm the victim, I'm a martyr, everybody's after me, it's all illegal, it's all criminal what's been done to me by even suggesting this. And Maria Bartiromo plays along saying, right. He says, I can't fight the narrative that's coming at me from all sides. Right, of course, Devin, of course. This is a page straight out of Trump's playbook. I will release my taxes once irrelevant and possibly non-existent audits are completed. Well, but Donald Trump, are you under audit for every year? There must be some recent years you're not currently being audited for, right? What about releasing some of those? I'm under audit. Once it's done, I'll release the taxes. Never happened, of course. And then I'll have some new reason because it's political. The seeking of my taxes is political or whatever else. I have new details about Barack Obama's birth certificate, which I will share whenever. Doesn't happen. The entire thing was a hoax. The birther fiasco was a race-based hit job done by some really ugly elements of the American right with the help of then reality show host Donald Trump, whatever. This is not what an innocent person sounds like. And eventually you know what the transition will be. We've seen it with everything. It'll go from it never happened to, okay, Devin Nunes was in Vienna. And sure, he met with Viktor Shokin, but that's not a crime. He wanted corruption to be investigated in Ukraine. And of course, that continues to be a meme that they rest on. But why aren't we asking, if Ukraine is as corrupt as Trump and everybody says they are, why would you go to them and ask them to investigate corruption? Doesn't really make any sense. Why would you go to a burglar and say, I need you above anyone else to investigate burglary. You wouldn't do it. It doesn't make any sense. And from the beginning, we knew that, and it's only becoming increasingly transparent now. So we'll see when they shift from I didn't do it to I did it, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's just called politics. After 2 weeks of denying that anything said in the impeachment hearings was true, Donald Trump went on Fox News and he admitted to the entire thing, for the first time publicly linking the supposed corruption investigations that he wanted Ukraine to do to the military aid. This is the first time it's happened publicly. You can't write a more ridiculous storyline. If this were a screenplay, it would be rejected immediately because it's too over the top. It's not believable. And yet it's the reality that we live in. So let me explain to you what took place. Donald Trump on Friday promoted an appearance on Fox and Friends after smearing impeachment witnesses, after denying that anything inappropriate happened, saying, quote, I will be interviewed on Fox and Friends this morning at 8 a.m. I know that there's not much to talk about, but we will try to keep the conversation going. Enjoy. And indeed, it was an interesting conversation because in this interview, Donald Trump admitted to the entire thing, not on purpose. I don't think he even realizes that he admitted to the entire thing. I don't know that the average Fox News viewer realizes that Trump admitted to the entire thing that he spent the 2 weeks of impeachment hearings denying. In this clip, he admits that he asked on the phone call for Ukraine to investigate Biden. And he says, I did ask them. And why should we give them hundreds of millions of dollars, linking the investigation request to the hundreds of millions of dollars in aid for the first time publicly?
And I still want to see that server. You know, the FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that? Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is, and that's what I asked actually in my phone call, if you know. Right. I mean, I asked it very point blank because we're looking for corruption. There's tremendous corruption. We're looking for, why should we be giving hundreds of millions of dollars to countries when there's this kind of corruption? Right. And if you look at my call, I said, you know, corruption. I think he said it to me. He got elected on the basis of corruption.
Trump, without realizing it, admits that that is exactly what he did. We're looking for corruption. We asked them to do it. And why should we give them the money? Implying, of course, if they don't want to help look for corruption, meaning chase down some absurd conspiracy theory and then use it to smear Joe Biden, why would we give them money? This went completely over the heads of so many people that were watching this. But this is Trump blurting out that the thing that he's been denying for weeks is absolutely true. Here's another rambling moment from the interview where Trump said, I always want corruption. It was a weird moment.
Your ambassador to the EU, Mr. Sondland, in his opening statement said that there was quid pro quo. There was quid pro quo, he said, because you wanted an investigation into corruption in exchange for a visit to the White House or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's total nonsense. I do want always corruption. I say that to anybody. Why should we give money to a country that's known corrupt? It's a very corrupt country. I mean, I love the people in Ukraine. I know Ukrainian people. They're great people. But it's known as being the third most corrupt country in the world.
Okay, so, I mean, I guess it seems pretty clear that Trump is not saying what he meant to say there. Is it a Freudian slip? Who knows? But once again, bringing up, why should we give them money unless they do what we say, unless they do what we ask them to do, which is investigate Joe Biden? He is admitting to the whole thing yet again without even realizing it. He's not admitting to it in the way that we might imagine would happen. But this is Trump publicly linking these vague corruption concerns, which are, of course, code for investigate Joe and Hunter Biden, linking that to the hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid. The other thing that's not being mentioned enough is, if Trump is insisting that Ukraine is rife with corruption, I want to say this again. If Trump believes Ukraine is just corruption laden, why would you insist on Ukraine investigating corruption? Why would you trust someone so corrupt to investigate corruption for you? It doesn't make any sense. Then there's one other really funny moment from this interview. When Trump did that CrowdStrike server conspiracy theory thing, even Fox News host Steve Doocy had to say, "Are you sure about that?" And if you are watching, you will notice that the look on Ainsley Earhardt's face, it never moves during this entire interview. Brian Kilmeade starts doing his sort of confused face, and Steve Doocy feels compelled to, because he knows that what Trump is saying is bogus. He feels compelled to say, "Are you sure about that?" Take a look.
Have the server, right, from the DNC, Democratic National Committee.
Who has the server?
Now, the FBI went in and they told him, "Get out of here. We're not giving it to you." They gave the server to CrowdStrike or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. You know, the FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they did that? Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is, and that's what I asked actually in my phone call, if you know.
Right.
I mean, I asked it very point blank because we're looking for corruption.
Brian Kilmeade, I think, is smarter than the other two, and he realizes with that you can tell this is not a good thing for Donald Trump to be saying. This entire fiasco went on for 50 minutes in a bizarre, rambling interview filled with self-incrimination, filled with lies. But understand, Trump believes it's smart for him to testify on his own behalf. That's why last week, when Donald Trump said, "I might be interested in testifying in this impeachment hearing," I told you his lawyers will do everything possible so that he doesn't, because just like in this interview, he will self-incriminate and he doesn't even realize it. He believes that he can talk his way out of anything and come away convincing everybody in the room to go over to his point of view. And case in point, Trump did this interview on Fox News and did not even realize that he admitted for the first time publicly that indeed the investigations he wanted Ukraine to do were indeed linked to the hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. People are getting death threats against themselves and their families for coming forward to testify about this. And Trump just blurts it out on live television. And of course, otherwise completely incoherent throughout the interview. This is an aside. It's an aside scandal. If Barack Obama had ever done one incoherently rambling word salad interview like this, Republicans would have immediately called for Barack Obama's removal under the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. Trump does it almost every time he speaks publicly. And not only do they stand behind him, they are almost smitten with his public persona and his public presence. It is something else. And I don't know when and how we are going to come out of it. I've suggested some of the ways, and I've talked about the uphill battle that it will be. But this is going to be a big, big recovery process for the United States if we are ever to undertake it and complete it. And I hope that we do. I hope that we do. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. While you're there, follow me at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back with much more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So we have some actual good news out of Israel, despite the fact that it may sort of take a while until anything really comes of this. And the news is that the longest-serving Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been indicted on charges of fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Now, as many of you know, Netanyahu has been a roadblock to any kind of serious peace possibilities in Israel for a very long time. And not only not the only roadblock in the circumstances that present themselves there, but a pretty massive one, particularly given his alliances with some of the most extreme right-wing elements in the Israeli Knesset. And he has now been indicted. This is the first prosecution in Israel of a sitting prime minister. And politically, things in Israel are very hectic. There have been 2 inconclusive elections, maybe going to a 3rd vote. This has been going on for almost 3 years with regard to possible charges against Netanyahu, and the charge is now finally materializing. Now, the obvious question that most people would ask is, well, what now? Does he leave? What happens next? It's unclear. This is widely uncharted territory. For now, he can remain prime minister. If convicted, he would have to step down, but it could be 3 or even 4 years until a possible conviction would happen. And that doesn't even account for the possibility of appeals. So this really could be a very long time. And it's going to be more about not financial pressure, although maybe so, given the level of corruption he's allegedly involved in. Political pressure. It may be more about political pressure in terms of actually making change happen. Netanyahu is apparently planning to stay for the time being. He's immediately using very Trumpian language to describe the entire thing. He's calling it a witch hunt. He's calling it an attempted coup. He wants the investigators investigated. I mean, it's a carbon copy of the rhetoric that we've seen Donald Trump employ around investigations and allegations into his misdeeds. But then there are also some pressing practical political questions. Number one, Benjamin Netanyahu is a member of the Likud party. Does the Likud party lose confidence in Netanyahu and say he has to go? There are elements within the Likud party that are saying we need a different leader. But so far, the official position of Likud has been they are standing by Benjamin Netanyahu. What might the quickest way be to get Netanyahu out? Probably if Likud says they're picking a different leader, which they could do at any time. But again, right now, it's not obvious that they're going in that direction. If Benjamin Netanyahu stays in power, it would not be surprising that he would try to get himself immunity through a congressional procedure, through the Israeli Knesset. But there is no Knesset right now in the sense that Benjamin Netanyahu has not been able to form a government since the last election. So it is a complete and total mess. What we do know, what we can say for sure, is that Netanyahu has been a disastrous prime minister from the point of view of moving forward on peace and some kind of even steps towards breaking the impasse of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, every time I talk about this, if I don't mention the both sides, somebody gets mad at me. There's no question that Hamas in Gaza has also been a disgusting impediment to moving forward. But no matter that, we still have to point out that Benjamin Netanyahu has no credibility as an even potential arbiter of peace, and he has to go if we want a shot. And hopefully that will be precipitated by this, although we don't know. I've said before, Benjamin Netanyahu is allied with the most extreme religious right-wing elements of the Israeli Knesset. That is not a group that is likely to oversee any serious advancements in breaking the Israeli-Palestinian conflict impasse. There is no credible path to a lasting peace deal of any kind as long as Benjamin Netanyahu is not only there, but again, under indictment on these charges. Israeli politics is complex. It's unpredictable. It's not obvious what the next step will be. Again, a conviction on these charges is unlikely to be the fastest way to get him out, since it could take 3 to 4 years for an initial conviction, and then there can be appeals. So this is going to be a long one. The immediate news is, of course, good. We have to understand that this will be a very slow process, which might in the immediate change very little, or something could happen like Likud saying Netanyahu's out, here's our new leader, which might actually bring change more quickly. There is probably more to gain by trying to seat a new government than trying to wait around for a Benjamin Netanyahu conviction. But some good news, although it's unclear how quickly it will bring any change forward. We'll follow it for sure. As many of you might remember, in October, I had appendicitis and had surgery here in Boston. And I was out for a couple of shows. One of the things that I've been telling you is that once I have the total cost of my procedure, I would sort of open the books so that we could look together and confirm once again how absolutely and utterly insane our healthcare system is. I now have those numbers and I'm ready to show them to you. And they are shocking, truly. So quick reminder, last Monday, I told you about how my health insurance is changing from 2019 to 2020 if I choose to stay on the same plan. Right now, I pay $421 a month. That's $421 a month. That same plan goes up to $458 a month for inferior coverage in 2020. My out-of-pocket maximum goes up. My co-pays go up. Tons of people who are either from other countries or have employer-subsidized insurance emailed me shocked that this is how bad it is here in Massachusetts, where we're supposed to be better off than lots of other places in Massachusetts. Now I am ready to tell you the full cost of my procedure. Now, I had looked up what does an appendectomy cost in the United States? And I found a range that says it can go anywhere from $1,500 to $180,000. Now, presumably the high range of that is if it's a more complex appendicitis with a ruptured or perforated appendix, where you often have to stay in the hospital for several days to treat the infections that sometimes happen. Now, to be clear, I got good care. The surgeon was great. The anesthesiologist was great. The nursing staff was great. I don't recommend getting an appendicitis, but it was made as least bad as possible by really great medical care that I received. They don't control the prices. This is not about them. My appendectomy cost $27,495 for the 8 or so hours that I was in the hospital. Let's put the numbers up. So we'll go through this particularly for people that are listening. The anesthesiologist's fee was about $1,700. The surgeon charged about $2,500. The visit to me at the emergency room by a different surgeon to tell me about the procedure was $460. The emergency room doctor who came over and told me they think I have appendicitis, that was $682. Of course, I had to pay $368 or was billed. This is not what I had to pay. The radiologist charged nearly $400 for looking at my CAT scan and telling me I have appendicitis. I had the urgent care visit earlier in the day where they told me, we don't think you have appendicitis. That was wrong. That was $445. My post-op visit and blood work. And then the big charge was the facility and all of the different supplies, the operating room, the anesthesia, etc. More than $20,000 there. My painkiller prescription, $85, for a total bill of $27,495 for my, as they call it, uncomplicated appendicitis. So the next question is, how much do I pay? I told you I have a $2,000 annual deductible for my health insurance, and I expected, since my healthcare spending was minimal and I didn't think I had made any progress towards the deductible being covered earlier in the year, I expected I would have to pay $2,000. And I was right, but in fact, it is more. So for me, my out-of-pocket on my nearly $28,000 appendectomy is my $2,000 deductible, a $55 urgent care copay from earlier that day, a $50 copay for my post-operational blood work, a $30 post-op visit copay, a $300 emergency room copay. I also had to pay $20 out of the $85 for the painkiller prescription, which I didn't even end up taking. And then, of course, I also paid for my insurance in October, $421. So my total October 2019 spending, including my insurance premium for this appendectomy, $2,876. Just a few interesting items from my itemized bill. There's so much more to it, but just a few things I found notable. When I arrived, they said, hey, listen, we don't know what's going on yet, but anytime people come in, we try to keep them hydrated. So we're going to give you an IV. I said, sure. That was $188. I'm glad they did it. I mean, it does seem like a good practice, but that nearly $200 for the saline bag. The CT scan. Of course, they needed to do a CT scan to determine if I have appendicitis. That was more than $2,000 billed to insurance. The IV Tylenol I was given before the procedure was $153. And, they didn't leave me in the hallway. They brought me to a recovery room after the procedure. That was $678. Now, what's interesting about that is they said that because they would probably only keep me a few hours after the procedure, they didn't need to bring me upstairs to a room. Now, if I was brought upstairs to a room, we would be talking about thousands more dollars because that would be considered being admitted to the hospital. They didn't do that. Instead, they put me in the recovery room for 90 minutes. That was $678, much cheaper than bringing me up to a room. So once again, what's the big picture here? The nurses were great, top-notch surgeon. Anesthesiologist was great. Everyone's bedside manner was great. They treated my girlfriend really well. Even after, as I was already on Valium and being wheeled in, I yelled out, I hope I don't die, which was not exactly confidence-inspiring to her at the time. They treated her well. They treated me well. But this is an insane system. Now, I want to be really clear. Owing $2,800 is not going to bankrupt me, right? I always assume that at any time, because of the insurance I have with the $2,000 deductible, I might owe $2,000 to $3,000 at any time if I have a need for medical services. So it's not going to bankrupt me. But that puts me in a privileged position because we know that half the country, I believe it is, can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. What happens with a $2,800 bill? It's a sickening and disgusting system, nearly $28,000. And of course, the hospital's not getting $28,000 because my insurance will go to them and say, we're only paying this amount, and the hospital accepts it. And the fact that they know they only get part of it back from the insurance causes them to have higher and higher sort of MSRP book rates for a lot of these things. The system is broken. I don't pretend that what I had is even close to the most serious or expensive thing that people would have. This is relatively simple, uncomplicated thing. And still, look at what we are talking about. Sickening, disgusting system. Hope this gives you some insight, particularly to our viewers outside the U.S., as to how all of this works.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This next story is really important, and I want to be sure I'm explaining it clearly because it is so important to understand. So we had a Democratic debate last week. This was debate number 5 in the Democratic presidential primary. It was on MSNBC. And you probably noticed that there were a lot of people who didn't speak very much. There were people on the stage who didn't talk nearly as much as other people. Now, I've already said, we just need fewer people on the stage. The requirements to make the debates are too low, and they're allowing a lot of people in who have absolutely no chance of securing the nomination. Voting starts in 6 weeks at this point, or 7 weeks, something like that. We need to be able to hear more from people who have a shot. We should have fewer people, but the people on stage should really split the time evenly because we notice that not everybody gets equal time. In general, we have a sense that if you're polling better, you get more time, and if you're polling worse, you get less time. And that in some vague way, speaking time is correlated to how you're polling. Polling higher, you get more time. Polling lower, you get less time. Now, as I've said before, I get wanting to hear from the people who have a shot at winning, but I don't believe the solution is put 10 people up on the stage and mostly talk to 5 of them. The solution is make the requirements such that there are only 5 people on the stage and then everybody gets the same amount of time. That's how I think it should be done. But the data around speaking time and polling is actually way more interesting than we thought. Dave C., who's one of our viewers, sent me a graph that he put together, which put on an XY axis screen time and polling. And it exposes some very interesting, but at the same time unsurprising realities, which are that the network had its favorites. And it was noticeable beyond just how it correlated with polling. So let's go through this. Dave put this together himself. The polling data is from Real Clear Politics on debate day. The screen time is as measured by CNN. I'll describe it for people listening, but this is worth checking out on video as well. The vertical axis is speaking time. The horizontal axis is polling average. And then you see this dotted line through the chart, the graph, which is the amount of speaking time that we would expect if it corresponded perfectly to polling. So what we very quickly notice is that in a general sense, people polling better spoke more, but there are some very important exceptions. For example, Bernie Sanders is closest to the amount of speaking time that would correspond to his polling. Sanders is closest to the dotted line. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, got slightly more speaking time than her polling would predict. Joe Biden got slightly less speaking time than his polling would predict. But the most interesting thing is that there is a cluster of candidates that got well more than their polling would dictate, and another set that got way less. The candidate who was most screwed, what I mean is the candidate whose speaking time fell short of what you would expect based on their polling by the most, is Andrew Yang. If you look at how far below the line Andrew Yang's speaking time is from what polling would predict, Andrew Yang was the most disadvantaged candidate thanks to the moderation relative to polling. Then you see Tom Steyer and to a lesser degree Tulsi Gabbard all got less speaking time than their polling would predict. But then look above the dotted line where Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker all got more time than their polling would predict. And then the biggest beneficiary, thanks to how MSNBC moderated the debate, was none other than Pete Buttigieg. Based on his polling, Pete Buttigieg is the candidate whose speaking time exceeded what his polling would predict. So let's now put this into context. I believe that candidates who qualify should get roughly equal speaking time. I believe lots of people on stage shouldn't be there because they have no shot. This is already debate number 5, and voting starts in like 6 or 7 weeks. But if you believe that the candidates should get speaking time based on how they're polling, that also didn't happen. Buttigieg, Warren, Booker, Harris, and Klobuchar, to different degrees, got more speaking time than their polling would predict. Bernie got roughly the right amount. Biden got a little less. But Yang, Steyer, and Gabbard got much less, particularly Andrew Yang. This is how the network's moderation continues to help or hurt candidates. The solution, of course, is networks should commit to giving roughly equal time to each candidate, and there should be fewer candidates through stricter requirements to making the debates in the first place. Pretty clearly, the network is pushing establishment candidates. When you look at who benefited, it was Booker, Harris, Klobuchar, and Buttigieg the most, and Warren slightly, who got more time than they would based on polling. Note that Biden got less time, but that sort of makes sense for 2 reasons. One is that his polling is so high that it's not shocking that his time was slightly underrepresented. Otherwise, he would just be talking way, way too much. It's also, by the way, probably to Joe's advantage not to speak so much since he blunders so often when he does open his mouth. But the point here is that even by what I believe is the wrong way to distribute speaking time, which is matching speaking time to polling, MSNBC greatly failed, screwing some people and giving some others more speaking time than they deserved. Really nice job by Dave C. putting this data together. Let me know what you think. So listen, we need to know what's going on with Donald Trump's health. In this story, I'm talking about physical health, not mental health. Mental health, of course, has also been a big topic of concern, but that's not the focus for today. Last weekend, Donald Trump went to Walter Reed Hospital for an unplanned visit. The White House has since said, he was getting a jump start on his 2020 physical. This is not something a president has ever done. This is something that Dr. Sanjay Gupta indicates is not how physicals are done as a general rule. It was all very weird. Walter Reed said they weren't expecting Trump. Trump was out of sight for 2 days following the visit. Then when he finally got back in front of the cameras, he looked acutely not good. So the other day, I noticed Donald Trump arriving on Air Force One in Austin, Texas, and I noticed a couple of unusual things. Donald Trump, other than looking very sort of ginger as he gingerly walking, I should say, not ginger, as he exited the plane, left through a lower door on Air Force One. Not something that presidents tend to do. But he was also followed closely behind by White House doctor Sean Conley, who then got into Donald Trump's limo with him. Now, it is normal for the White House doctor to travel with the president. It is not normal for the White House doctor to come off the plane right behind the president and then ride in the president's limo with them. A former White House doctor actually said to CNN that when they were a doctor, they never rode with the president the entire time that they were working there. And indeed, when Donald Trump rode back from the hospital last week, the doctor also rode with Trump, which is very odd. We've now heard from Walter Reed's staff that normally when the president goes there, certain roads are closed, certain corridors in the hospital are closed. Didn't happen last weekend because they didn't know Trump was going. So Dr. Sanjay Gupta has been looking at all of this. He says, look, you've got a 73-year-old Trump who has heart disease. He's medicated for it. He's clinically obese. He admits that he doesn't work out. He has a long history about lying regarding his health, and still now 9 days after this Walter Reed hospital visit, nothing is adding up. And on top of it, Trump is now riding with his doctor in the limo after coming off of the plane's lower stairs, which is unusual. And again, speculators might be thinking that the idea is have Trump come off of lower stairs in the event he were to fall. He can take smaller stairs. So for me, there's a very simple explanation here. They're lying to us. We don't know exactly why. We need to know the truth. They're lying to us. We're not looking to make fun of anyone for being obese or being sick or anything like that. This is about the lying needs to stop. It was a lie when Harold Bornstein put together that bogus letter saying Trump would be the healthiest president ever to be president. Trump obviously wouldn't even be healthier than the prior president, Barack Obama, never mind every president. Irresponsible thing for Harold Bornstein to say. They were lying when they said Trump was, I believe, 6'3", 239, which would put him just 1 pound short of being obese. Trump is closer to 6 feet tall, 5'11", 6 feet, 6 feet and a half, something like that, based on being shorter than Obama, being shorter than Tom Brady. It's lie after lie after lie. We just need to know the truth. That's all. And if you really want to see another indicator that something is wrong with Trump's health, he has not gone this long without golfing his entire presidency. We'll have more information about that. I don't want to muddle that in, but it's a related story, and we will talk about that tomorrow. Something is wrong here. We are not being told the truth, and I think we deserve to be told the truth. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. This voicemail is a reminder about why. What is it? It's a reminder of many things. This is a reminder about why we're not going to win by arguing with Trumpists. Okay, let me just leave it at that, and we'll listen to it.
Yes, I just want to know if you're watching the same impeachment inquiries than I am, because I don't know. Y'all don't understand nothing. I was a Democrat. Now I'm a Republican because of the way the Democrats have acted and done to this country, taking money from Social Security and everything else. And y'all have been after President Trump ever since he became president. And I think it's a shame. It's pitiful. Have a good day.
Yeah. So that's why just arguing with people and trying to convince folks like that, it just can't be a strategy. And we have sort of a follow-up voicemail to that coming up on tomorrow's program that I think you will also find equally disturbing if you are concerned with the truth and facts and understanding things as they are rather than as you would wish them to be. But that's a perfect example of why we just need to get the vote out, and convincing people like that to change their mind, it's not going to happen. All right, we've got a great bonus show coming up for you. We will talk about the 4 women Joe Biden says he would consider as running mates. We will talk about the struggles of the milk industry. We will talk about Tesla's new Cybertruck, and I will disclose share ownership. No, I'm not doing that anymore, but I do. And of course, remember that on Black Friday, we will have a huge David Pakman Show membership special. To be notified of that, just become a subscriber to the newsletter by signing up at davidpakman.com. And on Black Friday, you will have that very exciting membership discount code in your email. I'll speak to you on the bonus show in just a minute.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.